Hey, everybody, Steve here, Local Level Podcast. I'm sitting here with Max Barrick. He's partner at Favaro Gorman. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Steve. I appreciate it. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's interesting. The reason that I wanted to have you on is because you have something that's a lot different than what I normally talk about.
Sure.
I mean, we talk to small business owners primarily, but what I really wanted to make this podcast about is just interesting conversation, helpful things that people can actually learn from.
Sure.
So if you can, tell everybody a little bit about what you do.
So I call myself a civil rights employment lawyer. I do employment law. Right. So what that means is really any law that's any workplace dispute that would require a lawyer in some way, shape, or form, I'm getting involved in. So, and I say run of the mill, but we do sexual and racial harassment. So all the Me Too stuff that's come out, we handle those sorts of cases, and we're on the side of workers. We will represent businesses, but mostly workers. So sexual, racial harassment, and discrimination, whistleblower type of cases. So that's in the news a lot right now.
Yeah.
Unpaid wages, unpaid overtime wages, that sort of thing. Helping people negotiate severance. Maybe your job is going sideways. It's not working out for both parties, or they're changing direction, and we help people get a nice package for that if we can.
Yeah.
Unemployment benefits, really anything that's going to come up in the workplace.
Yeah, and the pre-show call that we did,
Yeah.
we kind of dove deep in a lot of these different topics. And
Sure.
Like I was telling you when we were on the phone, I mean, we could do hours. each different thing that you just mentioned, there's hours worth of conversation to have.
Right.
And I wish we had that amount of time, but I don't know if they'll hold through for all those hours. But so, I mean, touching on the main points of what you do, I mean,
Sure.
employment law, workplace things, sexual harassment claims, all that type of stuff. These are very, very touchy topics.
Sure.
And I think people don't really realize, I guess with what you do, people don't realize that there's a person like you until they don't know what to do.
Right.
Like you're lost, or, because you represent the actual victim primarily, right?
Normally, yeah.
So how does that process work where, how does somebody find you? I mean, I guess when something bad happens to somebody in their workplace, how does it kind of get to your desk? Can you walk us through that process?
A lot of different ways. I mean, sometimes it happens one of a bunch of different ways. One of the easiest is somebody doesn't know what to do and they just start Googling around for a type of lawyer, and based on how the different internet algorithms work, they hit the right buttons, they hit the right key search terms, and my name comes up. So that's one way. Most of what I do, though, usually comes in indirectly. So somebody's been referred to me some way.
Right.
Sometimes it's just another professional, hey, this thing happened, do you know anybody? But a lot of the time, it's the only other lawyer they know in their life. So somebody who did their will for them, if they, kind of screwed up and got a DUI and they go to their DUI lawyer, I don't know anybody else. Can you handle this? If not, do you know somebody who does? Mm-hmm. Maybe they've had, like a personal injury problem in the past. They were rear-ended or something happened and they go to their personal injury lawyer. Hey, can you work on this for me?
Right.
Maybe it's the person who did their real estate closing, that sort of thing.
Sure.
Usually it's coming from another attorney, like that would be the other source of it. Or just a family friend,
Yeah. I mean, so by the time it gets to you, people kind of realize that something serious happened. Is that the case, or?
Sometimes. Sometimes people come to me earlier on in the process and they say, hey, this is going on at work. I don't really feel right about this. Do you have a sense of what direction this might be going or what I should be doing? Sometimes it's after the fact. Like you said, I got fired. This thing happened to me. I need help. What can I do? What are my options?
Yeah, and what would be your answer for that?
I mean, it really depends on the problem. If it's like, the nature of that, hey, I lost my job, I was fired, I start asking them a lot of questions. The first thing we talk about is Illinois, like 49 out of 50 states, is at will. So that means the general rule is they don't need a good reason to fire you. They can just sort of fire you. But it's a longer conversation. Tell me about what happened. When is the first time you found trouble? It depends on the kind of case we're talking about. Is it somebody who thinks they were fired in retaliation for something they said or did? Well, then I'm going to want to know, how long ago did you say whatever you said, or how long ago did you complain about something?
Yeah.
What's the time frame here?
Yeah, just getting the facts, I guess, right? Knowing the client. Now, do you turn people down?
Unfortunately, I have to turn a lot of people down. One of the first things I tell people, you know, so when you say turn down, sometimes turning them down means, yeah, I can't file a lawsuit for you.
Yeah.
Sometimes people come to me not necessarily looking to do that.
Just for advice.
They're just trying to figure out what happened here. Can you help me? Is there something I should be doing here? Did I do something wrong? You know, but one of the first things I do tell people when they are coming to me to maybe represent them is, listen, one of the things that I've learned in doing employment law is there's a lot of things that are unfair.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily make it illegal, or maybe it is illegal, but there's not something I can necessarily do about it. So yeah, I would say the vast majority of people I can't always do something for. I try to give them some good guidelines and advice, but often I have to send them on their way because there is a lot of unfairness, but it doesn't necessarily always mean there's something I can do about it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, disagreements don't necessarily always end up in court.
No, and they shouldn't. I mean,
Right.
I think lawyers often get a bad name. You know, you think everybody's in a rush to kind of whack somebody for something, and I think sometimes things just don't work out too.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, it's interesting that you say. I mean, the majority, you kind of have to turn away, but at the same time, the ones that really hit, the ones that are really, really important, that must be. I mean, how many can you actually handle at one time? You know.
That's a good question. I would say at any given time, I've got somewhere between 20 and 30 or 40 cases. Not all that are, active. Some, maybe it's 5 to 10 that I'm investigating and I'm looking into in some way. Maybe it's 5 to 10 that are in court and being litigated, and I and others are managing them as they head towards a trial. And maybe 5 or 10 is, we've taken the client on, we're trying to negotiate an outcome for them. Maybe we're representing them. They've filed what's called a charge of discrimination with one of the civil rights, the federal or state civil rights agencies, and we're helping navigate that investigation process. So they're all at different points. Every case requires a different level of attention and energy, and it's sort of, you put out the biggest fires when they're out in front of you, and you try to manage everything else as it comes along.
Sure. And so now, what's the support structure look like for you? Because obviously you can't be in all these different places at once and keep things straight. So what is your process? Like, do you have, for investigation, I guess was my first thought, how do you investigate these cases? Do you hire a PI, or how does this all work?
So investigate means a lot of different things. From my perspective, when I'm looking into or I'm evaluating and investigating a case, the first step would be meeting with the client. So they got to come to us, fill out an intake form, make sure we've given them, the various warnings and explanations about statutes of limitations and what have you. And I try to take time with them to really get the ins and outs of their case. One of the things I ask people to do, if they can, and they're in a position to do so, before they meet with me, is try to put together some kind of timeline or chronology of events. Not a full essay. I don't want to read War and Peace necessarily, but something that gives me bullet points of what happened here, so I can get. Because what I explain to people is you've been living this every day for however long, but I'm coming to this fresh, and I want to make sure I get a good understanding of it. So a timeline helps me.
Sure.
So one of the things I'll do is that if we're talking about a harassment case, for example, because that might be a good way to do it.
Yeah.
Talk about some specifics. I'll want to know if there's some witnesses. Now, if they don't work at the company anymore, I'm in a much better position to talk to them. So I'll ask them to put me in touch with them, usually to make an introduction, because people tend to be freaked out when somebody calls them up from a number they don't know and say, "Hi, I'm a lawyer. Will you talk to me about this?"
That was one question. So yes, of course. And now a lot of these situations, you are going to be speaking to people that do work at the company still. So how does that work? I mean, isn't there? There's protections in place for that where people actually can't talk about it, right?
So it depends on the situation. Every different employee is classified differently in the company. If it's somebody who's a supervisor or manager, I'm probably not even going to bother trying to talk to them, because now before the company has a lawyer, before we're involved in something, I can talk to the low-level employees who still work there, and I don't mean like they're low-level, just not answering, that they're not
management roles.
Yeah. But what I have to warn them about is that this is not going to be confidential. So what my client and I talk about is protected by the attorney-client privilege, but what I talk to a witness about isn't. And so one of the things I have to warn witnesses about is that this is eventually maybe going to get back to somebody.
Yeah.
So you need to be prepared that there may be consequences. Now, in harassment or discrimination context, it's illegal to punish somebody for talking to me about that, for participating in an investigation. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And
Yeah, right. They can just make up anything, right?
yeah, and what I'll tell you is, well, they can make it up. I mean, there could be consequences to it, but it's hard. I mean, nobody wants, then they got to go get a lawyer or somebody like me.
Yeah.
And what I'll tell you is, one of the tough things for clients is, particularly in those discrimination cases, I can't tell you how many times people have come to me and said, I got like 8 witnesses to what happened. They're friendly with me. They want to do the right thing. They're going to back me up. And unfortunately, what they find out is that these people don't want to lose their job, and a lot of people don't want trouble.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, with anything, there's always a culture fighting back against talking about things that happen and bringing stuff up and making waves.
Right.
So you've got to be fighting against it a lot. Tell me a little bit about how you got into law. I mean, we were talking about you kind of coming up, and you had a pretty interesting story about, generally people don't just jump into one thing right away, but you had a passion for this type of work. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into what you're doing now?
Sure. So when I was in high school, I was involved in some social activism, like a Save Darfur club I'm from Glenview, so Glenbrook South High School. And I went to undergrad thinking I would want to do something that helped people in some way, something social justice oriented when I grew up. But who knows what that means when you're 18 years old. You think you can kind of save the world and get paid for it.
Right.
So when I was an undergrad, my summer jobs were like waiting tables at first. And we had a neighbor who was a judge, and I kind of went to him just for some advice, like what can I do?
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, he was kind enough to include me as an intern of his for the summer with all the law students.
Wow.
And that was great. I didn't get to do really any of the legal work because I didn't have the training yet, but I got to see them in action and see what they were doing, and I saw that I liked this. I liked the idea of being on my feet and being in a courtroom, and I knew I had this social justice bent that I wanted to do with that, so it kind of gave me an avenue, save the world, whatever, to kind of go in that direction and earn a living doing it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's really just people, places, and things, right? I mean, it's you're always one step away from meeting somebody that'll change your life.
You just never know where this stuff's going to come from. You never know where that next client, that next opportunity is going to come from, and it just shows. I think you've always got to be kind of on your toe. Not like you always got to be on, but you really want to be paying attention because you never know how you're going to impact people. Who's going to think well of you enough to say, "Hey, let me give you this option." Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's. And I find that it's when you're really, really seeking things out, it doesn't always come as natural. I mean, but I don't know if you guys can hear, but there's a Bears Packers game right now. Obviously, there's something happening pretty big right now. We can't see that, but
the bar just went crazy.
Yeah, the bar went crazy, and we are at Reps Place in Rolling Meadows, guys. So if you're in the area, definitely come and say hi to the friendly staff here. But back to what we were talking about.
Yeah.
So, like I was saying, I mean, it's very strange that you knew that you wanted to get involved in something. You happen to have this neighbor that gave you this amazing opportunity.
It was incredible.
I mean, you weren't even in law school or anything.
No, he'd had some college kids before, but I was lucky, and he ended up retiring not long after. So it really. Yeah, I'm lucky in life in that I lived in the right place at the right time and had a neighbor who was a good guy and willing to give some kid an opportunity to kind of see if this was what his dream was going to be for him.
Yeah, and now backing up a little bit, I mean, you said that it was social justice was something that is always important to you. You wanted to make a difference. What do you think instilled that into you? I mean, where did that come from growing up?
That's a good question. My parents were always really good about telling us to do the right thing, and you make sure you help other people. And I was lucky, in my upbringing, in that I got to live in a good place and go to a good school. And my folks were always, it was important to them to remind us that we came from somewhere good, but other people don't, and it's your job to kind of to stick up for others when they can't stick up for themselves.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's
stuck with me.
That's wise. Yeah. I mean. People a lot of times forget that there's much less fortunate people. They think it's just over their problem. It's not my problem.
Yeah, I think, I don't know. I've always kind of lived by the mantra of we're not here for that long. But if you can say with a straight face when you go to bed at night, you've done something to make somebody else's life better in some way, whatever that is, you're doing it right.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're definitely in a position where you can make a very big difference for people. Without going into any real details, just as far as you can, what have been some of the biggest differences you feel you've made in your career so far?
Wow, that's a good question. Like just individual cases, or
Whatever comes to mind. Yeah, I mean, where do you feel like you got? What do you feel was the most rewarding part of what you've accomplished so far?
I think when we've come to the end of a case, hopefully in the good, we've been able to settle it for them, or theoretically you go to a jury, but usually, you come to the end, you've resolved it, you've negotiated an outcome,
Yeah.
and your client says thank you. Sometimes it doesn't happen because this is really personal and it doesn't always work out your way.
Sure.
But I have to tell you, somebody who comes to you, in tears or in a really tough spot, in a really bad work situation, or just lost their job and is really hanging by a thread, relying on family, doing whatever to make ends meet.
Yeah.
Knowing what's been rewarding is, the first couple cases I worked on were a couple of women who were victims of some pretty bad sex harassment. Knowing that we were able to get them out of a really bad job, get them some financial compensation to maybe get some therapy, get back on their feet, get their families well situated, and just move on with their lives, put themselves back in a better situation, that felt good, and that always feels good. A thank you always helps, and it's nice to know that you've helped somebody enough where they're happy and they're better than when you found them.
Yeah, well, I think that's that goes for a lot of things. If you could leave things better than the way you found them, then you are making a difference. So that's great. And if you could specialize in one particular thing, I know that you're kind of specialized already with employment, but if you could have just one type of client walk through the door every day, what would that client be?
It's a really good question. I do like a lot of what I do. I have to tell you, the first job I ever had was doing these hostile work environment, sex, and race harassment cases. They're hard cases.
That's heavy duty right there.
Oh boy, yeah.
Man.
Well, they're hard because, there can be upsetting, and it's hard to prove intent. So, usually you got to prove that the employer knew what they were doing, and it's hard to get people to admit that or prove, if somebody's denying it, that they did something for a certain reason.
Sure, yeah, I can imagine.
But they're challenging cases. I like them. They're interesting, and they can be some of the most difficult and just painful to work through. But I find them rewarding for that same reason. So I would say the harassment stuff, if I had to do just one, that would be good. That would be the kind I would pick.
And then on the other end of it, there has to be some sort of just grueling, boring paperwork cases. What I guess I don't know if you even want to answer that, but would you say the majority of your work is interesting, or would you say the majority of it is in between time getting to the interesting?
Listen, I think any day, even your dream job is going to have stuff that. Even the dream job, you still got to sign the checks at the end of the day, right, or something like that.
Sure.
So there's always going to be some form of monotony.
Yeah.
Listen, the first thing I ever did at my first job was what's called doc review, which is sort of like bottom of the barrel first-year lawyers, that's what they stick you with. And it's what it sounds like. You're looking through documents. I think for some people that would be really boring.
Yeah.
I liked it because as a first-year lawyer, it made me indispensable to that case. It meant there was a reason for them to talk to me about it because I was the only one who knew where all the papers were.
Yeah.
It can be boring. There are times where sifting through thousands of pages of documents is like a horrific punishment. It's like, man, what did I do to deserve this? But on the other hand, it helps you learn about the case. It helps you get to the bottom of it, and you know what's going on. And sometimes you find, every once in a while, you find that smoking gun you're looking for that tells you, you know what, I got it. I got them.
Yeah, yeah.
So that stuff can be boring. It's not your favorite. Sifting through papers can be a lot.
Sure.
But if you know how to do it right, you plan well, it can be useful.
Yeah. There's always you nailed it. There's always monotony in everything that you do, but I guess it is worth it if you are actually making a difference. You're not just making widgets,
But somebody's got to make widgets.
That's true. There's a need. Yeah, and there's a perfect fit for everybody. It's just a matter of finding it, and some people don't. But
I think one of the things I see is that because I deal with workers all day, is that I'm dealing with a lot of people who don't get to do a job they like, or they don't.
Very true.
So I consider myself very lucky.
And that's a great lead into the question that I had, and we talked about this when we were on the phone. Emotional attachment to cases and clients has to come into play because you're human, you know?
Of course.
Can you walk us through some of the instances of maybe where you felt like you got too attached or maybe should have been more attached? Is there anything that you can kind of...
Yeah. At my first job, we had a case, and I won't give specifics for
Sure,
obvious reasons,
yeah,
but
sure.
we had a case of a type of harassment that sounded really horrific, and the client, would cry into the phone. I mean, like, this was some really serious stuff, and it was early in my career, and
Yeah.
you're learning, and I was assigned to the case, and I spent hours with this person on the phone talking to them about what happened to them, supposedly, and I got to tell you, like, it was really moving. You heard some really horrific racist stuff that
Yeah.
supposedly had happened to this person, and what came over time was that the story started to kind of spiral and stuff started to kind of make less and less sense. It was harder to track down witnesses. Like, you'd talk to a witness and then you'd kind of lose track of him and you could never find him again, and stuff
Sure.
started to not really add up. And finally, we kind of came to the conclusion, you know what, we really don't think this happened the way this person said, and we ended up withdrawing.
How does that conversation work? I mean, when
In our firm?
Well, I guess, so there's two parts of that conversation. There's your internal conversation with probably your partners or your team saying, hey, this probably isn't real. But then when you come to that, how do you break the news to your potential client?
So in that case, internally, the way the conversation went was, we're always talking about the cases. So you're never, I mean, when you're in a firm like that, you shouldn't anyway be going it alone. Everybody should be collaborating and working together
Sure.
because,
Yeah.
listen, I don't care how good a lawyer or anything you are. Like, you need a team, you need people to bounce things off of.
Yeah.
We're all going to miss stuff. We're all human, and it helps to have some support,
Very
particularly when, as I was at the time, I was, like a first-year lawyer.
Sure, yeah.
So it started from above. It was my partners that I was answering to saying, you know what, something's not adding up here, and me kind of finally having to stop ignoring that. And
You were ignoring a lot of red flags?
I don't know if ignoring was the right word. I was kind of internally explaining it away and defending this client. And
Okay.
it took them saying, listen, you're really very involved in this, and that's
Okay.
good. You're a zealous advocate. If there's one thing I've been guilty of, particularly early on, was like you get so attached, you feel like,
Yeah.
this is it. I've been training my whole life for this. I'm going to change the world with this case. And it's
Yeah.
like, slow down, pump the brakes.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Listen, something's not adding up here, and I think you know that. Let's step back, look at this, and see what's happening here. And you realize something wasn't adding up, and so then we come to the conclusion. You know what? We gotta get out.
Yeah.
Now, we were lucky we hadn't filed a lawsuit yet. We hadn't really done anything other than get ready, basically, to launch our advocacy on this client's.
Sure.
So we sent him a letter. It was, you send the client a letter saying, we didn't really go into, we think you're not being truthful. We don't think this happened. There's just no
What's
upside.
that gonna, right, yeah.
There's nothing to be gained. So we just said, you know what, in light of certain developments recently, unfortunately, we're going to have to withdraw. And the client called me up and, was frustrated and kept swearing up and down that this happened. And I got to tell you, I lost a lot of hours. I mean, my wife, I couldn't tell her why exactly, other than, I had this case. We were attached. We had to get out. And I wonder if I did the right thing here. And I lost a lot of sleep over it at that time. So
I can imagine, yeah.
I still get involved, in cases, if only because it's important to kind of sit in your client's shoes. Because even when you have to give them bad news they don't want to hear, it's important that you can understand where they're coming from.
Yeah.
So you understand why they're reacting emotionally in a certain way. I lost a lot of sleep over that. So I do still try to sit in my client's shoes. I do sometimes still get probably more emotionally attached to the case than I ought. But that taught me, you have to remove yourself sometimes.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're not going to be able to see the stuff that's wrong with the case or the problems the case may have.
Sure.
And sometimes your job calls for you to have some harsh conversations with your client. But if you can't remove yourself from how you feel about it, you're not going to be able to see when that happens.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense to me. You have to, sometimes you have blinders on, and you don't see all the facts, because we are human. Now, you said that you lost some sleep, and I'm sure maybe got some gray hairs a little bit, but has this work when you hear a pretty rough story? When you are at work for 12 hours or whatever in a day probably, how do you separate it from your personal life? Does it bleed in I mean, does it weigh you down emotionally?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
I, as a person, I'm really bad at turning my brain off. I have a hard time with it.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've had to learn to do is, like, when you walk in the door at home at night, I try to finish my workday when I can, when I'm at work, or if I go home and I'm finishing, I try to have whatever. It's not like, oh, I'm going to go work for more hours. It's like, I'm going to finish whatever thing I got to finish today, and then I just got to agree to shut the computer and not look at it anymore.
How's that working out?
Depends on the day. Ask my wife. Some days good, some days, some days she's got to remind me, like, Max, it's 7:30 at night. I've been hearing you, go on about this for a while. It's time to talk about something else.
Well, that's it's important though. I mean, you have that. How long have you been married?
3.5 years now, almost.
Well, so I mean, it's really important that you have that support structure at home. I guess I don't know. Has this affected your relationship? A lot of work?
At times.
Yeah.
I think I'm very lucky that I do have somebody. My wife Debbie and I have been together 3.5 years, but we've known each other. We've been together in some capacity since we were in college, 10 years.
Oh, great.
So she went through the whole law. She would tell you, she's funny, like, she'll tell you, like, I feel like I went to law school too.
That's what I was getting. You threw me for a loop when you said 3 years, because it seems like I assumed you've been together for a long time.
We've kind of grown up together. We've been together a decade, basically. So
yeah, that was a long time.
She went through law school with me. She was there for me with it. Like, I was lucky she was with me the whole time when things were good, when it was like, oh my God, this is really hard. Like, I don't know if I'm doing well enough. I don't know if I'm going to do this. Like, for her to be like, listen, this has been your whole life building to this. Like, you have to stick with it. You got to just kind of buck up, get through it, keep working. But that's also been good because she's been with me so long. She knows this isn't new.
Yeah.
Like, if it wasn't, okay, these are really hard cases that stick with me, or the workload, or just there's always so much to do. It's like, listen, you were like this when you had too much to read in law school, or when you had this or that. Like, it's always going to be something, and you gotta just accept that you're not going to do everything all at once, and sometimes you got to be okay to turn it off, walk away, and know you need a good night's rest. You need to go do something for yourself.
Sure, yeah. Very important that you have somebody that kind of knows your level of, I can take it or I can't take it, or knows when it's time for you to probably hang it up for the night. So that's really I love to hear that. I think that helps a lot, and I'm happy for you with that. Now, one of the things that we talked about and we just kind of touched on a little bit is fake claims, people making things up. Besides the story that you just mentioned, can you tell us a little bit of how that works and how you guys spot that stuff?
I think so. Here's what I would tell you. I think these are not black and white problems.
Yeah.
It's important to see things from both sides, because I don't know how the old adage goes, but there's something to the effect of, like, there's three versions of every story: your version, my version, and then what really happened.
Yeah, right.
And I think that's important because sometimes both sides can have a partially true story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it definitely does.
What I find is I will often have clients who've been victims of something bad that's happened to them at work. Somebody is stiffing them on something they're owed, or somebody is being inappropriate with them in the workplace. Also, they're not a perfect employee, and they're doing things that are not helpful either. But to your point, I think the things that we look for, and not necessarily to tell if somebody's lying, but just to tell, are we going to be able to prove that this happened, or that it was more likely than not that this happened.
Sure.
And I'm going to look for contemporaneous complaints. So in other words, I just keep going back to the harassment examples because that's my bread and butter.
Sure.
But did you complain about it, or did you tell somebody when it was happening, or did you keep a log? Is there something you did that would show me that it's likely that this was going on? Did your demeanor start to change when you started working at this place? Even if you weren't telling people why, because you were ashamed, you were afraid.
Yeah.
Is there somebody in your life that can back up that, you were a really happy-go-lucky person, and then you started working for this boss, and you never told me what it was, but something changed about you, and you started taking your work home with you, or you started being real anxious, or something like that? That stuff I'm going to look for. I'm not, when I meet with somebody, I'm not going into it looking to catch them in a lie or something.
Yeah.
I try to give people the benefit of the doubt. If the story sounds too fantastic, then yeah, I'm going to start to question it. It's hard. I mean, doctors can't always catch somebody who's telling them fake information to get painkillers.
You can only go off of what you hear, you know? I mean, for the most part, you got to take their word for it at first.
There was one example, a case a couple of my partners and I worked on a couple years ago. It was a discrimination case. Somebody worked at a type of business. That person said I was not hired because of my, we'll say, gender.
Yeah.
I heard the person say it on the phone. We got ready to file a charge of discrimination with one of the different agencies. We sent a letter to the employer. Mm-hmm. And the employer called us up and said, listen, I understand you hear this stuff from employers a lot, that this is being made up and it's a conspiracy. But I got to tell you, we got no record of this person ever applying here.
Oh, wow.
We've got nothing. The one thing I can tell you is this potential witness has an axe to grind with us. This person's saying they did it electronically. You can go ahead and make this demand. You can file the claim. You can go forward. I got to tell you, there's nothing here. Please investigate A, B, and C pieces of evidence that we're giving you. In that case, yeah, we've got something to go on. I'm not going to just take the word of somebody calling my client a liar, because it happens. Mm-hmm. Once out of every 1,000, somebody will make something up. But I try to believe people, because for every one like that, there's 100 who, even if I can't help them, something bad did happen to them.
Wow, yeah, that has to be... whenever you're working with variables outside of yourself, there's a lot of jobs where, okay, this is your job. If you know what you're doing and you do it well, then you should be able to accomplish something every time.
Right.
Your job is not like that at all. You're dependent on other people's stories, what you can determine and prove, and a lot of hearsay, So that has to be frustrating. I mean, I don't want to beat the dead horse, about how you deal with it. I don't know if I could deal with what you do. Now,
there's some challenging days.
Well, sure. So that's what I wanted to get to was, throughout the years and going through this stuff. I mean, did you ever question if you got into the right career path or not? I mean, did you ever feel like maybe you wanted to give up? Was there ever any doubt that this was the right thing for you?
I didn't want to give up, but there was a period. So after I left my first job, I was there about a year and a half. It was a virtual law firm that did all civil rights cases.
Sure.
I'm still on very good terms with them. They're very good lawyers. We send business back and forth, but it was hard not like seeing other, I said virtual, so I was working out of my apartment, keeping weird hours, and yeah, it was hard, and I left without maybe having a great plan of how I was going to get into employment law locally.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought out the next move well enough, and there were some lean times. I was working with a family member, helping him wind down a criminal practice. Or work on it, and things had slowed down because he had been sick, and yeah, things were slow. For a period of time, I was actually waiting tables at a local restaurant I'd worked at, summers in college and law school, because things were slow work-wise, and I needed to. Yeah. There were times where I was, lawyering by day and then going to, pull some bar shifts at night, and I got to tell you, I was kind of thinking like, this is not how I pictured it. Am I doing something wrong here? And then, you get through it, and it worked out, and I'm glad, I think, in a way that I went through that stuff, because it forces you to really consider whether you got to really love something to kind of pull another shift, to work that second job to make that first job work.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say that was probably the time. That and that first case I had that I described for you, where the client was dishonest, and you spend so much time believing them and pouring your heart into
Draining.
it. Yeah, so it's emotionally draining to hear those tough stories, and then it's like a sucker punch to hear that they weren't true and that your judgment was so wrong. Mm-hmm. I would say those were two moments that were real hard for me.
Yeah, and I guess you're still doing it, so it must have worked out. Now, I mean, outlook. If you were to if you could do anything else, if you could down the road, 10 years from now, do you see yourself doing exactly the same thing, or what's the outlook? Where are you going from here?
It's a good question. I'd like to be. I mean, it's always, these things are always going to change, and what what this is, what I'm doing now, may not look the same in 10 years. I mean, the way the laws, the interesting thing about law relative to a lot of other areas is it's always changing. People write the state of Illinois passed a bunch of employment laws that are going to take effect January 1st that are going to change some of this stuff.
I want to talk about that too, yeah.
I would like to keep doing employment law. I want to be better at it then. I think I'm pretty good now. I'd like to think I'm good, but you always want to get better. I want to, keep honing new strategies for doing it, but I'd like to think that in 10 years I'm still doing this stuff.
And this is another thing that we bring up every now and then, and people talk about the rise of, I guess, AI, and there's a lot of advancements in law in particular that will be taken over by artificial, I guess. You plug the law in it and it knows.
Right.
I mean, it saves a lot of hours. Now, do you think that it'll get to a point where law as we know it is not a human-based thing anymore? How does that work? Have you put any thought into that at all?
I guess I should start. I hope not. I mean, listen, that stuff's already changing as is. Like whether it's outsourcing it, like things that they used to have at these big law firms, the young associates do now get sent overseas, some forms of doc review.
Sure, yeah.
I think some doc review stuff is done automatically now.
Yeah.
Some of what we do, I'd like to hope at least, can't be replaced.
Yeah.
Research is a way that it's changed a lot. When I was a first-year law student, they took us to the library to show us how to do book research for law, because it's a little different than how you use library books elsewhere. But then they basically said, but also this doesn't really apply anymore as much. And now the search engines that we use as lawyers have become so advanced. In a lot of ways, they operate almost like Google. Like, you used to have to put in all these weird terms and connectors, which were like phrases for you put like a backslash next to like a letter P to say you're looking for this term within this many paragraphs or this many words of this other word.
Sure.
And now it's like you can kind of throw in a term like Google to one of these Westlaw or Lexis, and it's like giving you the answer. It's crazy how much that stuff has changed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's see, the thing that I tend to lean towards the fact that there's always going to be a place for the human element, because that's the game changer. If everybody's using the same tools, then you're not really, it's not even everybody's working with the same hand.
Right.
Well,
and also a lot of what we do requires a form of subjectivity that, listen, there's a reason I'm an attorney, and part of it is because it's what I wanted to do. The other part is I'm not good at math and science. So I'm not an engineer. I don't know exactly how AI is going to work in all these. But my gut is that there's an element of subjectivity to some of this stuff, that as long as there are people working next to other people, you're going to have conflicts arise. And like the wage and hour stuff that we do, okay, some of that could be automated, but you still got to have a lawyer kind of pursue these things and kind of dig through what's officially happening and what's actually happening.
You actually brought up, okay, so the automation with the wage in particular. I mean, we could look at McDonald's or fast food places as an example. Have you dealt with them removing those jobs because they can't pay the $15 or whatever it is? Agree or disagree? Have you encountered that where they're replacing people with machines yet?
Yes and no. Not that people are getting let go because the wages are too high. But I mean, we've represented people whose job deals basically in a manufacturing setting with keeping the machines running. There can be a lot of pressure on that, particularly at big companies where there's a lot riding on it. Yeah. Where a lot of these problems come up, at least on the unpaid overtime stuff, is you've got businesses that really can't afford to have time out. They can't have their machines down. And they keep their engineers working pretty hard, some tough hours. And the wage and hour cases can be easier than the discrimination cases to prove, because I don't have to prove intent. I've just got to show that there's a violation of the law. But the law can be really complicated on these things, and there are some subjective elements to knowing whether or not stuff's happening a certain way, if that makes sense.
So in order for employers to keep the machine running and keep those people working at full capacity all the time, there have to be some things that you've encountered, some little hacks, some little sneaky things that they've tried to pull to get around the law and skirt that system.
Sure.
How can you, without telling people how to break the law. Can you kind of address that a little bit? You know, how that can be caught, or how as an employee you can recognize when you may be being taken advantage of by an employer?
Of course. So one of the areas that it'll happen a lot in wage and hour situations. And I'm not going to give everybody a first-year law lesson on what this all is, because I don't think that's why people are listening. But the general rule is you got to be paid for the 40 hours a week that you're working. Anything over that is time and a half. You're going to overtime. That's the general rule. Now, there are exceptions to that. Different industries have exemptions to that.
Like the restaurant industry is different.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. But to get the tip credit, restaurants, there are certain basic markers they got to hit. They can't just say we're getting a tip credit, we're not paying people. There are certain things you got to do, minimums. So one of the ways workers can know if they're being taken advantage of is you can just Google it. The Department of Labor, the U.S. Department of Labor, has these fact sheets that basically say, here's what the rule is in order for my employer to be allowed to do X, Y, or Z, because it's there for them. So working lunches, for example, a lot of businesses may deduct the 30 minutes that you're getting off for lunch. They don't have to pay you for that time, but you got to be completely relieved of duties. So one of the ways that we'll see it a lot of time is they're deducting for that time, but people are really still at their desk. You know, if you're a receptionist, it's like, well, you're not paid, you're on your lunch break, but you're not allowed to leave your desk. You must eat at your desk. You have to still continue to answer phones. And if something requires you to get up from your desk and drop what you're doing, we expect you to drop what you're doing, put your sandwich down, and go do whatever you got to do. You know, the next thing you know, it's 3 o'clock. You still haven't eaten that sandwich, and you never really got your break, but you weren't paid for that time. That's one thing that might be an example.
Yeah, I've encountered things like that before.
Sure.
You know, people kind of just, oh, well, you know, if you really cared, you would work extra.
Right.
You put in the extra effort, you know.
Exactly.
And that comes up a lot, especially in sales.
Yeah.
Sales is a big one. I mean, I did sales for pretty much my whole career. So straight commission and things like that, you know, sometimes you get a base or whatever, but you can work, you know, until you're dead. You know, you're falling asleep at your desk, you know.
Right.
How does the law play into that?
So sales, there are sales exemptions to the FLSA, to the Fair Labor Standards Act, the law on that. So unfortunately for sales individuals, you know, that is one area where your pay structure can be commission driven, and they can make you work a lot of hours. You know, one of the things you look to is, so the Department of Labor tests that I was talking about, there are different factors you're weighing, you know, what percentage of your duties are dedicated to sales versus other things.
Right.
That's the stuff you're looking at. Where I'll see a lot of problems for sales professionals is you're working all these hours, you're meeting these quotas, you're hitting these numbers, and then you do too well and the company yanks the rug out right out from under you.
Yeah, that could happen too, yeah.
And we see a lot of that where people have earned their commissions, they've earned their pay, and their company doesn't want to pay them anymore.
Now, what's the remedy for that? How do you I mean, that's your bag right there, right?
Right. So I'm looking, there's a great law in Illinois called the Wage Payment and Collection Act, the Illinois Wage Payment and Collection Act. And the general rule is if there's an agreement for you to do some work and you to be paid for it, they got to pay you. And the nice thing about that law is it's got these now we're talking a state law, not federal, but the state Department of Labor has promulgated or put out regulations on that, particularly on commissions that say, and I'm not looking at them right now, so I'm not going to pretend to be reading you what it is, but it tells you exactly when a commission has to be paid, how frequently, when it's considered a commission. They can't just call it a bonus, so they don't have to pay it to you.
So what is that called again?
The Wage Payment and Collection Act. It's a real good law. You can Google it. It's on the Department of Labor's website. You can access it. Okay. It's some il.gov website.
Yeah.
But if you are concerned that you might not be getting paid properly, that would be a place to look.
Yeah, very, very helpful. I think a lot of people in sales in particular there's a lot of bad actors in that industry.
Yeah, unfortunately.
You know? And because, you know, I mean, you're dealing with people that are trying to sell constantly. They're selling their staff, they're selling their customers, they're doing all that stuff. So
you gotta hustle.
Yeah, they're hustling. I hate to use that word, but you know, that's what it is.
I do want to say one thing. I do represent primarily workers, but I don't want to paint this broad brush that I have something against employers.
No,
you know,
not at all.
There's this gray area on a lot of this. I represent a lot of businesses too, where they may make a mistake. They're not trying to mispay somebody, or they're not trying to screw their workers. Can I say that?
Yeah, you can say whatever you want.
You know, they're not trying to screw anybody. They're trying to run a business. They're not dishonest. Just they make a mistake. These laws are really complicated. There's a reason why I'm not rattling this stuff off verbatim off the top of my head because it's complex. And,
Right.
I think sometimes these disputes come out of misunderstanding, or people mean well but make a mistake. And I think it's important for us as attorneys to kind of try to not look at listen, there are some situations where I may go more scorched earth in how I approach this, but sometimes that's not justified. Sometimes this is the simple matter of, let's just get everybody whole and not make this more than it has to be.
Yeah, that's a smart way to look at things, definitely. I mean, it's not about bringing people down and trying to, like you say, go scorched earth all the time. Sometimes people deserve it, but a lot of times they don't, and they're just trying to feed their families and run a business. And so that is a great segue into some of the things that I wanted to cover for the employer in particular, because like you say, the law is ever changing, so in order to stay up to date and know that you're in compliance, it's pretty tough, especially for a small business owner. You don't know which way is up a lot of times. One of the things that you had mentioned, the Workplace Transparency Act.
Right.
Can you explain a little bit about what that is?
Sure. So it's a law that came up in the wake of the Me Too movement over the last couple years. Governor Pritzker signed it into law this past summer, I think in June. So it says a lot of different things, but it basically institutes some minimum education and transparency requirements for all employers in the state. So the education requirement is basically, as of January 1st, come January 1st of 2020, every employer with at least one person working for them in the state is going to have a mandatory sex harassment education requirement. So the Department of Human Rights, one of the organizations that's tasked with investigating these things when they get complaints, they've been tasked with creating a program. So there is going to be something available to people, or you can buy or create one of your own that hits certain minimum requirements. But that's going to have to be done annually from here on out.
So let's elaborate a little bit on that. So the sexual harassment training, that is paid for by the employer, and it's just, is that correct?
Yeah, I think it might. I have to check. I'm pretty sure that what the IDHR is going to create is going to be free, so you can just get their materials and present them. But you are going to have, the employer is going to have to do that.
Kind of like
staff.
putting together the literature for that, making sure it's available to the employees. That's kind of what you have to do.
Right. So they're going to have to basically have this presentation available, and it's going to need to be given annually, whether it's that one or a different one that hits those markers. But you're going to have to do that for your staff every year.
Wow, and that's going into effect on January 1st?
Correct. So that obligation, you'll have to have satisfied it by January 1st of 2021. So you'll have all of next calendar year to get it done, but it's got to be done by December 31st of next year.
Now, have you looked into that deeply yet? I mean, it's new.
So I haven't seen what they've put out yet, or if it's even out yet, but I know there are certain minimum requirements they're going to have to hit with it, like what constitutes sexual harassment? What are we talking about? Stray remarks, or what does it look like? Another one of the requirements is going to have to be, so one of your first questions to me today was, how does this person get to you? How do they even know to do it?
Right.
Well, one of the things that's going to have to be covered is, or one of the topics is, what are my remedies? If somebody does harass me in the workplace, what am I supposed to do? Where do I go? What rights do I have? So that's going to have to be there. So just like those OSHA pictures and all those minimum, workplace safety posters that employers have to put up. Think of it like that, basically, moving forward.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it makes sense,
right?
I mean, it makes sense to have those things in place, and so I'm glad that we have you on. It's perfect timing because that's going to go into effect right away. So,
of course,
pretty soon here. So, as far as before we kind of like jump out of the sexual harassment stuff, since we brought it up, what is sexual harassment? How do you define that in the workplace? I mean, I guess everybody knows what sexual harassment is, but when you're just barely there, what is that?
So it's a good question. The cases, there are laws in place. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, some people have heard of that, basically says you can't discriminate against someone on the basis of their sex or gender. The way that can play out at work, one of the ways is harassment. So the cases, the judges basically who've made decisions that interpret that law say specifically, we're not talking about stray or loose remarks. So and that we're not here to police the workplace in that way.
Right,
so one
okay.
comment here or there, it can be inappropriate, and
Sure.
I suppose if it's bad enough, it can raise to that level. But we're not talking somebody makes a joke once and never again.
And there's a difference too between what can get you fired because it's against the company policy,
Right.
and what can get you locked up or fined or whatever.
Correct. What gets you sued versus
Yes.
you said something inappropriate to somebody you shouldn't have.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The company may take it more seriously, and that's good in a way that they're
Sure.
taking it seriously. But what we're talking about is remarks about somebody's sex or gender. So some of it's what you would think about. You know, the boss says something about the skirt you're wearing or the pants you're wearing, whichever way it's going. You know,
Sure.
or the way you look,
Right.
or they put their hands on you in a way that you don't like in a sexual way.
Sure.
Or it can sometimes be not even that, and you're more like they're using the B word, for example, to describe women, or they're talking about, they're basically making inappropriate and sexually oriented or gender motivated remarks.
Or just
in the
having
workplace.
conversation that's inappropriate in the earshot, right?
On a consistent basis, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, the test that the law puts out is severe or pervasive, so not just one comment and not minor stuff, but really bad, inappropriate stuff that happens on a consistent basis in the workplace such that it's interfering with your ability to do your job.
Now, that's also a thought that comes to mind is who is actually liable for that? Does that fall on the owner of the company and the management? Obviously, it does, like business-wise, but legally, if you have an employee that is, consistently doing these inappropriate things and making the workplace toxic and make people feel, like they don't want to be there. Who's accountable for that? Is it the management or is it that particular person? And how far does it go?
So that's a good question, and it depends. There's nothing. So listen, if you don't complain, if you don't report it, if the company doesn't know,
Yeah.
there's nothing they can do. And that's what the law says, basically. If it's a coworker who does it, but
Yeah.
you don't report it, or the company, it's not so blatant, you really, and this is always harder to prove that it was so blatant that they knew or should have known.
Right.
But if you report it and then they don't do anything about it, and it's a coworker, then it's the company.
Okay.
Now, if it's a supervisor, and that supervisor
That's-
has the authority to basically hire or fire, it's a complicated test. But essentially, if it's a supervisor and that person has an ability to affect your job, then it's a little different. The company can be strictly liable if it's that person who's doing it, if it's like the owner of the company
Yeah.
or a high-level manager. When it's coworker to coworker, though, if the company doesn't know, they're not going to be liable for it. So in order for the company to be responsible for what their lower-level employees are doing, they got to know about it and then basically choose not to investigate and resolve it.
So, okay. Now, say, for instance, we have a situation where harassment has been found or there's something, has risen to the level where it's not legal. What happens? What do you get? If you were sexually harassed and it's found to be true and what happens? I mean, it's not like you're gonna sue to get your job back because obviously you don't want to work there anymore.
Right.
So what can somebody kind of expect from that?
So what I tell my clients is these are tough cases because you've had something bad happen to you, and it's quite possible that the other side's going to say, you know what, this didn't happen, or
Yeah.
didn't happen like you said, and that can be really hard to hear because it's not only that you've been victimized in this one way,
Now
but
you're re-victimized, yeah.
right. So those are hard, but what you can expect is you're going to start by filing a charge of discrimination with the Department of Human Rights or the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. It's the federal agency. And they're going to investigate, and that's going to take some time. In the meantime, if you're filing the lawsuit or if you're going to move forward pursuing the case, you're talking about damages, basically. You're talking about what can be done to make me whole. Because
Right.
like you said, the chances you're going to go back to that company if they fired you on top of everything else or if you quit are slim to none.
Yeah.
It's rare.
Right.
So you're talking about damages, and there's different measures of that. One of them is lost wages, your back pay. How much money have you lost? And you got to be looking for work, obviously. There's emotional distress damages, and people kind of sneeze at that sometimes. But listen, if this is so bad that you are getting a lawyer involved, chances are it's affecting you emotionally. You're losing sleep, you're gaining weight, or you're losing weight. Maybe you're losing your appetite, or you're binge eating. Something like that.
Sure, yeah.
You're nauseous. You feel queasy when you go into work. you're sort of you've become a little dysfunctional, like you're having a hard time doing your day-to-day tasks. It's hard to prove that if you don't treat, and it's sort of a double-edged sword because, like, you lost your job. Who's got the money to go pay for somebody to help them with this?
Yeah.
So helps if you've been telling your doctor about it along the way and kind of making notes that you're not feeling right and it's related to work. Those are the measures of damages that we'll typically look at. Front pay too, like, okay, maybe you lost your job and you get a new job, but it doesn't pay what the old one did, and your opportunity for growth there is not as high. Yeah. So I'll look at what's the difference, how much less are you making now, and how much more could you have expected to make had you stayed at your last employer.
Yeah, and another thing that comes up that is inevitable with any of these things is your reputation.
Right.
And that goes both ways, though, because even somebody that doesn't have any intention of doing something wrong or has ever done anything wrong, just because they see on your record of past employment or maybe contacting a reference or something like that, and they see, hey, this was a problem or whatever, You're
talking about the harasser?
Sure. But I'm saying like, if you go into chances are a lot of times when you work and you move to another company, it's because you maybe have heard about it from somebody else. Maybe there's people that kind of are connected, so the word gets around, is what I'm saying. People are human and people talk. So when you make a wave and you sue and you bring a harassment claim, sometimes people will be like, you know what, maybe let's pass on this one. And that is illegal, right?
Yeah.
But how do you prove something like that? You can't, can you?
No, it's really hard. And I've had that happen a lot of times where somebody leaves a job, goes somewhere else in the same industry while this is going on, and then out of the blue it's like, you know what, it just doesn't feel like a good fit anymore. And it's hard. I mean, it's really hard to prove. When it's settled, when these cases are settled, almost always there's a non-disclosure, non-disparagement provision that both parties are agreeing not to talk about what happened, not to trash each other, not to go around saying this person's a bum or this person's a this or that. But it's really hard to police everybody, and it's hard to prove that somebody breaks it. One of the things I always try to negotiate is a neutral reference, or positive. Usually it's pretty awkward to make it positive when both parties feel so badly. Yeah. But neutral, just for them to tell another employer, listen, this person worked here. Our policy is only to say this, these were the dates of employment, and move on. It may not fix that, and that is something that's always out there that, we have to warn people that sometimes it can be hard to stay in that business.
Yeah, and I'm just, I like to look at it from all different angles, I figure that there are cases sometimes where maybe somebody is a little worked up about something and they think it's the best way is to go and involve other people, where in reality you're probably getting yourself into more trouble sometimes, just down the road consequence-wise, besides the law, by making claims. And it goes back to the litigious culture that we kind of live in. Sure. How do you, what would be your recommendation for somebody? Where is the level where you should get a lawyer involved? And where is the time when you should maybe just say, you know what, I don't get along with these people. I don't feel comfortable in this place. Maybe I should just leave, That's
a really good question. I think a couple answers. So as to the latter, basically, when it's time to leave. Listen, not everything that happens is illegal. Yeah. And it's not illegal. It's not illegal for somebody to be rude to you at work. Like, just sometimes it's clash of personalities. And I think it's important for all of us to kind of look at ourselves in the mirror, because I think one of the things I do find is that, sometimes these things can get ugly in the workplace, but sometimes we're responsible. Yeah. And we got to think about, if this keeps happening to you, not sexual harassment, nobody asks for that. Right, but if you keep having conflict with everybody you work with everywhere you go, then maybe think there's something that's happening that
the common denominator there,
If everybody else seems to get along everywhere but you, then maybe rethink. Yeah. But, if you're not sure, it always helps to ask somebody. Mm-hmm. The nice thing about the digital age we live in is that, as somebody once told me, we all have these computers in our hands that have all the information in the world.
You're right, yeah.
And you can always look up, this is what's happening to me. I'm sure that problem has happened to somebody, or there's a lawyer or some group that looks into these things, and maybe you find out what's happening to you is not, or maybe you find out, what they're doing to me is really bad, and it never occurred to me that it's a problem. And so
Yeah.
you can look for somebody to help you. I'd say the answer is always try to get more information. And the other side of it with people being too litigious is, as attorneys, it's our job to screen these things and to be selective,
Yeah.
and to make sure that if we are going to get involved, it's really necessary for us to get involved. It's not our job to solve every problem. Not every problem, requires a lawyer, and not every problem can be solved by a lawyer. So I think that's the dual responsibilities there for attorneys and for everybody else involved.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, but when you do have some sort of recourse, and there's a need for a lawyer, you're the person to contact.
I'd like to think so.
Now, are there any other things before we move on? Are there any other things that you guys do? Like, can you, if you're not going to take a case on, have you ever referred people to like maybe see, like a doctor or something like that?
course.
Therapy.
Yeah.
And do you kind of point people in the right direction with that?
I try to. I mean, we try to. Sometimes it's a problem where there really just is no solution.
Yeah.
You got fired for stealing kind of thing. Like, there's nothing illegal about them firing you for
Right.
that. They should fire you. Like, I'm not getting involved in that. And we'll give them the names of some organizations. Like, maybe somebody else will see this differently. Feel free to reach out to them.
Yeah.
But if it's not an employment law problem, or it's a problem that does require somebody else's help, we'll try to point them in the direction that they might go. Like, you might talk to somebody about this problem or that problem. Trying to think of a good example of that, and I can't offhand. Okay, so I'll give you an example. So, like, maybe
Sure.
somebody gets fired, and they can't physically do the job anymore. They can't do any job anymore. Like, maybe they are physically disabled.
Sure.
I might point them to somebody who could help them claim legal disability at that point, because they can't really work anymore. And so
yeah.
maybe their problem I can't solve, but maybe somebody else can help them get something
Sure.
to stay on their feet, not lose their home, get whatever benefits they need so they can get healthy, get back on their feet, and get working again.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
That would be an
that's-
example.
Yeah, that's no, very helpful, definitely. And so, just a little higher level now. In a theoretical world where you had unlimited amount of money, just the sky's the limit. What would be if you could open or do anything with that amount of money? What would you be doing?
Wow.
Like, I mean, like blow your mind type stuff. Like, what would be your Elon Musk philanthropic thing that you would do?
Wow. That's a
I meant to put you on the spot, so.
mission accomplished. I don't want to get political, but climate change is a real problem, so I'd certainly try to fix that. And if I had unlimited resources to fix it, would be one way. I would like to, I don't know, solve world hunger kind of thing. I mean, fix that.
Okay.
I don't know if I have like a product in mind or anything like that, or necessarily something like that. I just think, other than buy myself a real sharp suit or something like that, first, and something nice for my wife. I think, if you've got that kind of money, it would be fun to kind of fix some seemingly unfixable problems with it.
Yeah, everybody kind of has like an idea of some of the things that are important to them, and I think it's crazy to think, because we put ourselves in like we're framed in the resources that we have at the time,
Right.
And to really look outside of that and put yourself in the shoes of somebody that is like way richer than you, and we're rich. It's hard to kind of do it on the spot. But I wanted to ask you that. I normally don't ask people that, but
That's okay.
I wanted to ask you that
Thanks for
because
throwing it at me.
Yeah, well, you said that you wanted to make a difference, so I was curious to see what that might be.
I think those would be the two things off the top of my head that I would want to fix. If I could snap my fingers and like Thanos and
Right.
and
Yeah.
fix something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've gone for about an hour now. This is like I said, there's so many different avenues to we could go down there, but
Of course.
Very helpful stuff. I mean, if you could leave the audience with maybe some resources or things that they can do to contact you or to help them or whatever, help themselves or whatever.
Of course. So to reach me, our contact information is on our website, Favaro Gorman, Favaro Gorman, GORMAN.com. Our contact information is there. My personal contact information is there. You can email me, call me. I'm happy to meet with people, to help them if they've got a problem. If you do feel like there is something, if you think you've been the victim of a wage and hour issue at work, you're not being paid properly, I can help you. There are a lot of other good lawyers at NELA, National Employment Lawyers Association.org. There's a lot of good lawyers who devote their careers to doing this. You can also go to the Department of Labor's websites for both the state of Illinois and the feds. Or the federal government, I should say, and you just Google those. They have fact sheets, so depending on the type of industry you're in, you might be able to look and kind of just do a quick look through and see if there's an exemption, or if you can kind of tell based on what's out there. It is geared not to lawyers, but to consumers. You can go to the Department of Human Rights or the EEOC's website and you just Google those if you think you've been the victim of discrimination or harassment in the workplace. I think those are places I would start with that. And if you're an employer, there are a lot of other good attorneys as well who can help you out of a difficult situation.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you just make a mistake, or sometimes you didn't, and you get a bad apple of somebody that worked for you, and through no fault of your own, you're kind of getting hit with something that you don't think is fair, and everybody needs representation. So those would be the resources I would point out.
Well, that's very helpful.
Sure.
And so for everybody tuning in, listening on wherever you're listening, audio, or if you're watching this, definitely check out and we'll put the links below, so you can check it out, and definitely speak up. If something's going on, it's not going to change if nobody brings it up.
Right.
So.
The one thing I would warn people is a lot of clients come to me and say they've secretly recorded something, and I would tell you, please do not do that. That is illegal in Illinois, so I don't want anybody to get in trouble trying to do that.
Very good point. Yeah.
So, sorry. That was a weird interjection there. But.
No, very helpful. So. Very helpful. Yeah, great takeaways from everything. It's really a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun, and I had a good time. This is a great show you got, and thanks for having me.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks.